Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to TransCelerate's webinar, Measuring the Impact of Risk-Based Monitoring. Excellent. I'm Jenny Sullivan, Program Manager for Mature Solutions at TransCelerate. My co-hosts today are Julie Day, Program Director for Mature Solutions, and Gloria McHugh, Project Manager for Risk-Based Monitoring. We're fortunate to have 3 team members from the RBM workstream on the phone with us today to cover the content of the webinar. They've all been involved in developing these solutions and are subject matter experts representing a variety of our member companies. We have Samantha Hewlett, Risk-Based Study Execution Capability Lead at Amgen, Rodrigo Perez Morantes, Clinical Studies Unit Risk-Based Monitoring Business Lead at Sanofi, and Mary Arnold, Director of Clinical Science Management Operations and RBM Lead at Astellas. Please note that all lines have been muted to ensure a pleasant listening experience for all attendees. You may reduce the GoToWebinar control panel by clicking on the orange and white arrow in the upper right corner. We welcome questions throughout our discussion. Those can be submitted using the questions function you should see in your control panel. Be sure to select send after typing your question into the box. This webinar is being recorded. If you do not consent to be recorded, please send a note using the questions panel. We'll be using the GoToWebinar polling function during today's webinar. Your participation is voluntary, and all responses are blinded, and aggregated answers will be shown as a percentage of all respondents. To test out the system and ensure our audio is working properly, we'll launch our test question. Please tell us your favorite color. Okay, thank you for voting. We see the winner is blue. All right, I'm going to go over some ground rules for our webinar today. We want to make this discussion helpful and answer as many of your questions as we can. So here are the ground rules. Your participation is voluntary, as is using TransCelerate assets and tools. The responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations is owned by the solution adopter. You don't have to identify what company you work for. There are things that we ask you not to discuss. Please don't discuss what vendors, sites, or CROs you are using or not using. Do not discuss any issues you have with any vendors, sites, or CROs. Do not discuss long-term development plans, nor anything related to cost. We cannot answer questions about vendors, the cost of using or implementing TransCelerate assets and tools, nor which member companies are using the assets and tools. So a quick look at today's agenda. We'll start off with an overview of TransCelerate presented by Julie. We'll then talk about RBM Metrics Measuring the Impact of Risk-Based Monitoring, presented by Sam. And then we will go into the member company perspectives with RBM Metrics. We'll follow up these presentations with a Q&A. So I'd like to introduce Julie to go through the overview of TransCelerate.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. As mentioned, I'm going to give a brief overview of TransCelerate. For some of you, this might not be new news, but for others of you, it'll give you a little bit of a background of who we are. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So TransCelerate is a not-for-profit entity. We were created to foster collaboration. And our shared vision is really to improve the health of people around the world by accelerating and simplifying the research and development of innovative new therapies. Next slide, please. So TransCelerate as an organization was founded way back when in 2012. We started with 10 member companies at the time, and we had 5 initial initiatives. RBM was one of them. And in 2016, BioCelerate was founded. For those of you that aren't familiar with BioCelerate, this is a focus on our preclinical research. So essentially everything in the preclinical space is done here. Today, we have 21 member companies. We're really proud to communicate that Bayer is our most recent member company. And we have over 25 initiatives, including 5 pharmacovigilance initiatives. And we're really proud of the work we do. We really feel that we have a breadth and depth with over 60 solutions coming from these 25 plus initiatives. And they're across 3 different strategic priorities. And we are feeling that we are enhancing industry collaboration. We have an effective and proven governance structure, which has increased the ease and desire to collaborate. And lastly, we're really working on standing up initiatives that support the notion of a future platform trial design. So these include 12 initiatives that deliver solutions to facilitate this future state. And I do want to mention that we do have something called TransCelerate. This is a technical solution that we've developed, and it's a platform to enable data sharing. Next slide, please. So the reach of our global membership is expanding. Our membership is available to biopharmaceutical research and development organizations that engage in innovative delivery, development, and manufacturing of new medicines. So on any given day, TransCelerate has about 20 plus people in just our organization. However, the visual representation here of all of our member companies and the in-kind contributions that each of these organizations provide to us means that we have about 1,000 plus people that work on our initiatives and solutions every single day. And we really couldn't do what we do or be where we are today without the support and input from these member companies. Next slide. Okay, so that was a brief introduction on TransCelerate. I over to Sam Hewlett from Amgen, who's going to talk about measuring the impact of risk-based monitoring.
Thank you, Julie. So hello, everybody. My name is Sam Hewlett. I'm from Amgen, and I'm responsible for risk-based study execution at Amgen. If we can go to the next slide, what I'm going to do is just talk through, in summary, how TransCelerate over the years have measured the metrics that we have provided. So as Julie said, the RBM initiative was one of the first ones that TransCelerate launched back in 2002, and from 2012. So from 2012 to 2017, this is really the active phase of the initiative, and there was a lot of work that was done. There were 8 methodology framework papers that were released and multiple tools and resources for the industry. And over that period of time, we also continued to collect and aggregate blinded RBM metrics data from member companies. And certainly we saw a significant increase, most significantly from 2015 to 2016. So over the last couple of years, 2018 and 2019, we're looking at this as the more mature phase of the initiative, really focusing on facilitating awareness, adoption, and best practice sharing amongst the member companies. We try and make sure there's ongoing high visibility engagements across the industry, like the one we're doing today, as well as conferences and site advocacy groups. The perception generally is that RBM is improving quality and efficiency. However, quantifying the magnitude of improvement does remain challenging. So moving into the future, we know that RBM will continue to evolve. There are multiple factors, including ICH-E6, EA provisions, evolving QMS systems, and technology advances that have got the potential to impact risk-based monitoring. So if we go to the next slide. So per the FDA suggestions, we have been collecting data from participating member companies quarterly from 2013 to 2017, resulting in over 1,000 observations that we have collected. Guided by a defined set of RBM metrics, the member companies have voluntarily reported data to TransCelerate on clinical trials where they are implementing RBM. And member companies have been asked to rate change over time for each of the metrics as either better, worse, or about the same as compared to what their company's internal baseline expectations were. And that data was blinded, aggregated, and reported by TransCelerate each quarter. So if we move to, just to say that in 2018 and 2019, what we did is we further aggregated the data to try and analyze the RBM trends and produce cumulative observations. So if we move to the next slide, this is a summary of the observations that we noted. So implementation of RBM does appear to improve quality, oversight, and cost of clinical trials as shown in all metrics. In the majority of cases, the expected outcomes appear to have been realized, and in some cases, the potential expectations have been realized as well. In general, RBM implementation allows for increase in quality of clinical trials, measured as audit findings, issue resolution time, and protocol deviations. Quality should also increase over the maturation of the trial with alignment with potential expectations, which, since we are looking for areas of risk earlier. It does require fewer resources to be allocated to on-site monitoring. We're getting better signals for overall monitoring costs and on-site intervals. However, clinical sites and monitors may require more centralized oversight. And it is most effective when using centralized approaches to monitor all the metrics and risks. If we move to the next slide. So in 2019, TransCelerate conducted an anonymous survey of member companies to try and understand the organization's own application of the original RBM metrics that were developed back in 2013. So 18 member companies responded to the survey. The results were blinded, aggregated, and reported by a third party, then analyzed by collaboration across the membership. So the objective was to analyze the current member companies' use of the original metrics, assess how the benefit of risk-based monitoring are currently measured, and determine whether new metrics have been developed to further successfully define the value of risk-based monitoring implementation. And so over the next couple of slides, we will go through into the analysis and the interpretation of the experiences of the TransCelerate member companies. So please don't consider this a one-size-fits-all implementation guidance. This information has also now been published in a paper that's available on the TransCelerate website as well. So if we go to the next slide. So what we see here is the decision behind adopting RBM. So primarily, the responses from the company indicate that quality and compliance and efficiency and cost are the primary drivers for implementing the RBM model. We go to the next slide. In terms of the types of trials that are in scope for RBM, what we have seen is that implementation of RBM is now seen across all phases of interventional clinical trials. That has increased over the years. Traditionally, it was in the later phase studies, but now 14 companies are reporting utilizing RBM in all phases of their studies currently, and some other companies have taken a more sort of staggered approach to the implementation. And the member company approaches to the implementation have evolved over time to expand to where our current state is at the moment. The next slide. So what we see here is the various components of RBM that have been implemented by the various member companies. Not surprisingly, risk assessments, reduced SDV, and the remote monitoring approach to analysis and monitoring are the main components that are consistently seen across the member companies who have adopted the RBM model. The original focus areas of the TransCelerate model, the site focus, appear to be also well established. Furthermore, the risk-based approach appears to be spreading to other related areas like data cleaning as well. Next slide. Interestingly here, what the member companies were asked was, how long did it take to be able to see or measure the impact of RBM implementation? So whilst it appears that RBM does contribute positively to the development process within 1 to 3 years of implementation, few companies are tangibly measuring its direct impact through metric analysis, and many are still developing their metrics and data collection of how to determine the benefit of implementing RBM. So while we understand that quality is a key decision driver for implementation, organizations do struggle to measure quality directly and note significant change management efforts are necessary to be able to support the process. If we go to the next slide. Finally, what we're presenting here is the member companies' assessments of the original metrics being used to evaluate the implementation of RBM. So in orange, you can see that those are metrics that are currently still used, some that have been used in the past, and some that have never been used. And as we go through the rest of the webinar, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the experiences in implementing some of these measures. And then finally, just to represent the assessment about the usefulness of the original metrics. So in orange, you can see the member companies finding those particular metrics extremely useful. Some of them were somewhat useful, and then some that were not very useful. And there's potentially various reasons for those, and we learn a lot about that through the discussions that we have within the RBM working group, and how we need to consider evolving these in the future. So I think we are ready for our first polling question. And so fingers on the buttons. The question is, has your company implemented metrics to assess the value of RBM? Please vote now.
Thank you, everyone. It looks like we've got about 61% of the people on the phone have voted so far, so we'll just leave that open for a few more seconds and allow everyone to vote. And I'll go ahead and close that and share the results.
Okay, that's interesting. So what we're seeing here is that it's quite a mixed split between those that definitely have, some that haven't, and then quite a few equal amounts that potentially are not sure whether it has been done. I think that particularly some of the challenges around doing this is how to measure and what to measure in terms of the real the impact of RBM and how it is improving the quality of the trials that we are delivering. So this is not it's not a surprising result. Okay, so the next question, whole question is, how helpful have your company metrics been in measuring the value of RBM. So how helpful have your company metrics been in measuring the value of RBM? So vote now, please. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. So far we've got about 50% of the folks on the line have responded, so we'll leave that open for a few more seconds, give everyone a chance to respond. And I'll share the results.
Okay. And I think once again, not surprising that we have quite a mixed bag of the responses. It does demonstrate, I think, the challenges that we have in trying to pick what the right metrics are. So, and that's it's still something which we've got quite a bit of work to do in. Thank you very much, everybody, for your responses. So if we can move to the next slide, please. What we're going to do now is move into a session where we have invited 3 of the member company representatives to share their perspectives on the RBM metrics. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Mary Arnold. Mary is the Director and Clinical Science Management Operations for an RBM lead for Astellas, and she's going to be talking about her experiences in implementing RBM metrics across the 2 member companies that she's worked for over the years. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm going to spend about the next 10 to 12 minutes talking about my experiences with the RBM metrics in the 2 member companies, as Sam mentioned. If you could go to the next slide, please. So these are the 8 TransCelerate metrics that Sam shared earlier. I don't think there's any reason to repeat any of that. But at both member companies where I've worked, we attempted to measure and follow these metrics. And my experiences are similar in some ways and different, probably due to the different cultures and organizations that I've been part of. Next slide, please. So I spent approximately 4 years supporting RBM at Company A, and now have been the RBM lead at Company B, Astellas, for about the last 2.5 years. And you can see from the 2 boxes on the screen, there are some similarities and differences in these 2 companies as illustrated. So probably the most significant difference that has had an impact on our measuring and monitoring these metrics has been the fact that our site monitoring function at Company B, my current company, is fully outsourced. And that has provided some challenges in accessing data that we didn't necessarily encounter in my previous company. Another difference is that the RBM metrics are really developed from the outset and tracked quarterly. And I sort of inherited the output at Company A, so I was not as involved in developing the actual metrics. When I came to Company B, Astellas, we were not currently in the process of developing or monitoring these metrics, and so I have a little more insight into the development and the challenges associated with them. Both companies sought to develop all 8 TransCelerate metrics, and both companies also sought to develop a non-RBM comparison for each metric. So in both situations, we've tried to aggregate data from historical non-RBM studies as a comparison to the metrics that we are obtaining, reflecting the impact of RBM. Next slide, please. So I'm going to break these 8 metrics down into 3 categories, really referring to the ease or difficulty in developing them. And due to the time constraints today, I won't be able to spend a lot of time or go into a lot of detail, but I can cover some of the highlights and challenges. So at both member companies, these 2 metrics, the median number of days from patient visit to ECRF data entry, and the median number of days from query open to close were what we would consider the easier metrics to develop, and that was really because of the accessibility of the EDC data. So even though they may have been the easiest to measure, the importance of ECRF entry time really can't be overstated. The remote and central aspects of RBM can't be undertaken without data, so this is an important metric for RBM success. Keep in mind, though, as RBM has evolved, much of our endpoint data now may come from other sources rather than EDC. So it's important to ensure we have data currency regardless of whether the data is coming from EDC or not. Next slide, please. So on the next two slides, these list what I would consider the challenging metrics. So not the easiest and not the hardest, but all have had some type of challenge in developing or interpreting them. I'll share some of the challenges or issues associated with each metric. And in some cases, what makes them challenging is not necessarily developing the metric, but interpreting the metric. So the first challenging metric is the average number of major or critical audit findings. This was not necessarily difficult to measure at either member company, but sometimes difficult to interpret based on the random or targeted nature of studies that are audited. So not all studies are audited, and there may be significant differences in the organization's audit plan, especially when you compare it to a non-RBM baseline period of time. So perhaps the auditing philosophy was different during the non-RBM days, the historical time that is compared to what the audit philosophy may be currently at your organization, reflecting audits in RBM studies. And then there's also the challenge of the consistency with which audits are performed across phases of therapeutic areas. And again, this is a challenge in interpreting the RBM metric versus a non-RBM baseline. The second challenging metric would be the number of significant protocol deviations. So this one challenge has been more specific to my current position, current company, and that is the data source. So for both the issues metric and the protocol deviation metric, the data source for these two metrics is from our vendor partners' CTMS. And so sometimes we've encountered challenges in obtaining and interpreting the CTMS data. And then similar to the audit finding metric, when you think about protocol deviations, there has been an evolution in the process associated with protocol deviations over time. There's been a lot of work in TransCelerate over the last few years to gain alignment and consistency in how we categorize protocol deviations, and that may present challenges when we compare current protocol deviation rates to historical rates that may have been identified or managed in a different manner. And then, as I mentioned, the most significant challenge that I've seen in measuring or developing the issue open to close metric has been in obtaining the data sources when it's collected by our vendor partners. The next slide, please. The two additional challenging metrics have been the average interval between on-site monitoring visit per site, which has a direct impact on the average monitoring cost per site. So again, many times or most times, I think the average interval between on-site monitoring visits is the data source for that is CTMS data for monitoring visit dates. It certainly has a direct impact on monitoring cost. And what I found at the company where I am today, Astellas, is that it is helpful if you can visualize the utilization of on-site and remote visits if you're using an adaptive approach to site monitoring. So it's helpful to have the average interval between on-site monitoring visits as a number to know from one study to the next, or from an aggregate of RBM studies versus an aggregate of non-RBM studies, how that metric may have changed. but it's also helpful to visualize or to account for the utilization of remote visits as well. So we're currently in the process of developing a tool where not only will we be able to obtain the average interval between the on-site monitoring visits, but we'll be able to see how the remote visits are used as well. So we're hoping that this is a valuable tool in working with our vendor partners to implement adaptive monitoring as we would like. So the average monitoring cost per site, I've had really two different experiences in the two member companies that I've worked at. So there's really two scenarios. Company A, the company where I used to work, all of our monitoring was in-house. So we could estimate the monitoring cost through resourcing data, considering the number of FTEs, the number of studies, and an hourly salary. So even though these weren't actual costs, we could estimate it based on resourcing information. So as I mentioned, one of the biggest differences in the two companies where I've worked has been the fact that currently, in my current role, we outsource all of the site monitoring. So we started to look at the actual spend rather than this resourcing process, but ran into numerous challenges looking at actual costs. It's difficult in comparing a non-RBM baseline to RBM and RBM cohort to understand all of the variables that may impact the actual cost, such as the increasing cost over time, changes in portfolio, or different vendors. So we basically abandoned this metric at my current company, and we're assessing costs through our financial organization rather than the management of RBM. So if you could go to the next slide, I'll spend the last few minutes really on what I think most of us consider the most challenging metric. And I think this was reflective in Sam's slides that she just reviewed, that this is the least used metric, and probably because of the difficulty in generating it. But interestingly, most member companies considered it to be the most useful. So really, this metric, the percentage of unreported confirmed SAEs as compared to total SAEs as discovered through any method, is a reflection of the quality of the safety reporting process and the value of SDR as a monitoring tool. So it's difficult, obviously, to measure something that's unknown. And really, I have two examples for how we have addressed this at each company. Essentially, you can't measure the unknown. So both companies have undertaken a process by which they've used a surrogate. So at the first member company where I worked, we looked at this metric, correlating it to a monitoring visit report question that asked about the quality of safety reporting of a site. So that the question was something like, have there been any unreported SAEs? And we used the answer to that question to measure the quality of SAE reporting at sites, comparing RBM studies to non-RBM studies. So in the second example, the company where I work today, Astellas, as I said, we outsource our monitoring, and it's, we have a variety of different vendors who use different monitoring visit reports, and using a strategy like this won't work as well. So we have attempted to correlate SAE reporting time to the quality of SA reporting in general at a site. So the assumption is that if a site reports SAEs in a timely manner, it correlates to a quality safety reporting process. And you can assume then that if there are significant delays in reporting SAEs, it's because the late SAEs were found by the monitor at the site. So you may be able to find a better way to manage this metric. It's certainly worth exploring because patient safety and safety reporting are of paramount importance. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, some of the common challenges that I've seen at both member companies are access to data, establishing and maintaining the non-RBM baseline. This is a significant challenge as we move down the timeline of implementing RBM. At both companies, we made a fairly full transition eventually to the RBM model, and so we are not initiating and conducting non-RBM studies. And so the difference in the landscape a few years ago versus today is a challenge. And we've addressed that in my current company by establishing a non-RBM static baseline to then compare future RBM data to. But it's definitely a challenge. Another item to consider as you develop metrics to measure the impact of RBM is the visualization tool. Tableau is what we're using today at Astellas. Obviously, Spotfire is another option. We're also using Excel, and we have found that Excel surprisingly has some ability to create dashboards, not nearly as powerful as Tableau or Spotfire, but has definitely provided the functionality that we've needed to share some of those metrics. And then the last conclusion, or the last challenge I would just want to highlight is, as we have more experience in RBM, are these the metrics that best reflect the value of RBM to your organization? And there are other sources that propose other RBM quality metrics or value metrics that you might consider as you develop and continue to measure the effectiveness of RBM. So I appreciate your listening to this summary really of 2 experiences implementing RBM metrics. And now I'd like to turn the webinar back to Sam, who will share her experiences at Amgen.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Amgen experience and how we have evolved our metrics over time. So if we want to just flip to the next slide, I think that what we can certainly, and it's a build slide, so if you just want to build it to the end, thank you. So there's 3 clicks. Really over the years, we have seen an evolution in the way that we monitor. So back in the good old paper days, when the CRAs went to site, we knew that we were looking for important data. We knew that there was everything to get through, and it was really like, you know, trying to find a needle in a haystack. I think generally now we are in the second space, where we have evolved our metrics over time and our ability to aggregate data and to be able to visualize data. So we know that we're generally looking in the right area, but as we move on into the future, we know that the value is being able to very precisely detect where the risks are surfacing for studies, for sites, etc. So we really need to continually revisit and examine the data sources that we have, the methodologies that we apply to be able to interpret the data, to see how effective the metrics are in detecting where the true risks do lie. And as we are able to create more precise metrics, I suspect it will become a lot easier to measure the value that RBM is providing to organizations. So if we just go to the next slide, just to talk a little bit around how Amgen's model has evolved. So we first implemented a version of RBM back in 2012, and really our primary focus was on reducing source data review and verification with an enhanced focus on data review, meaning that central data review, looking at inter and intra-patient consistency checks to make sure that, due to the fact that we had reduced the level of verification we were doing, we were still looking at all the data and being able to pick up any data discrepancies. So we were supported by, many of the metrics that we've already discussed. So data entry, query resolution, protocol deviations, data entry backlog, source data verification backlog. And the approach that we took was that metrics were reviewed by the CRAs every 2 weeks, and based on what they saw in the data, they would drive actions according to some predefined guidance. So the challenges we had with that original approach was that the data that we saw in the reports that the CRAs were running were not reproducible. It was a point in time, and we expected the CRAs to describe that in their monitoring visit reports, but we weren't, as data changed from one day to the next in that system, we weren't able to reproduce it. We also didn't have the ability to obtain trend data. And so I think we've learned that the ability to see how certain data points and risks evolve over time, potentially in response to actions that are being taken, is really important. Also, it wasn't flexible, it was quite rigid in terms of the data that we looked at and the framework that we built, and it was very granular in nature. It was quite challenging to have a high level view of where the risks and the issues might be across sites or across countries, etc. So if we want to move to the next slide, in 2018, we took an approach to look at evolving our model. And so the way I like to represent our model to our organization to try and help them understand the role that central evaluation of data, these metrics that we're looking at, play in supporting the overall monitoring of our studies is in like a house with various pillars, and everybody has a role in supporting the structure of that house. And so when we have the CRAs going to site and they're doing a risk-based level of review and verification of data at these different flexible monitoring schemas, our ability to do that and the cadence at which we visit the sites is very closely linked to our central monitors looking at our operational risk indicators, our centralized statistical monitoring group looking at these outlier sites and being able to focus CRA's attention, and underpinned also by the data monitoring that's done through our enhanced data review, looking at real-time ongoing assessment of the data by a group of folks that do that. And ultimately, all of this is underpinned by a fundamental concept that we all are implementing, I'm sure, across the industry within the CTRAC. So the study level risks and assessments and the critical processes and data that we have in our studies, and how each of these elements that we have support the ability to manage our studies in a risk-based way. So, but what really pushed us in the way that we evolved our model is that there were many more players at the table. We have an increased data complexity. We are facing increased regulatory scrutiny, and the need for us to align our framework with study-specific risks. And there is definitely a greater expectation from the business to be more precise in how the data and the actions that come out of that data are impacting our monitoring resource. So we have subsequently, the latest part is implemented a set of operational risk indicators that it's reviewed by a central monitoring group, and they propose actions to the CRAs. And what we the KRIs that we implemented were really based on our refined thinking on the existing experience that we had with the metrics and what we felt was valuable over time. And I think that does reflect back to one of the slides I was presenting earlier, where we're talking about people and their feeling about the value of those metrics now. And so those were issued in 2013, and certainly thinking and data sources have changed over time. And I think
Sam, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but we've lost your sound. Sam? Sam, I don't know if you can hear me, but we have lost your sound. Can anyone else hear me?
Yes, Gloria, I can hear you.
Gloria.
Me too.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we have lost Sam, if she seems to have dropped. So I'm thinking that potentially we can maybe, Rodrigo, skip to you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Let me give one more try. I do see Sam on the phone.
Probably she's back.
Sam, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Great. Sam, I'm going to suggest that potentially you maybe drop off and dial in again, and in the meantime, we can we'll pick up where you left off after you are able to get back in, and for now, we'll move to Rodrigo. Let me share my screen again. Apologies for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. So, hello everyone. I am Rodrigo Perez. I am working for the past 4 years in this risk-based monitoring initiative in the implementation and the development of the strategy for Sanofi. And I'll be talking about where we are going with RBM metrics. Where is the future of RBM metrics? So next slide, please. So there are existing measurement processes that prevent us from quantifying the benefits of RBM accurately. So there are current challenges to this. Our member companies have reported some of these challenges, and we want to share them to you. So many member companies are clear and have reported that they perceive benefits on the RBM implementation. However, less than half of the member companies are able to use historical controls or baseline data to demonstrate the value of RBM implementation. It is not that easy to assess or even establish this baseline to have something to compare to. Another challenge is the fact that measuring RBM for a sponsor is not necessarily one size fits all. And this is the reason is due to the fact that each sponsor has its own way of implementing RBM, has its own RBM methodology, and in the same way has different methodologies to measure their RBM strategy. So now sponsors prefer a method of fit for purpose instead of one size fits all. Another challenge it's about the fact that there are multiple changes that are introduced throughout study operations. And by study operations, I mean there are new systems coming into place, new roles brought to study teams, new requirements that are constantly raising, and also different monitoring strategies. So this has a direct impact and even masks what is the true impact of RBM on each clinical trial. And lastly, there are limitations to consistently define, measure, and benchmark the quality in a scalable manner. It is not the same to measure the benefits on, when you start the implementation on few pilot studies, on early adopter studies, than when you escalate it to a broad use or to a full use of RBM. So these limitations derive on challenges to quantifying the value of RBM and other quality-focused initiatives. Next slide, please. So how are RBM metrics evolving? The art and science of measuring and demonstrating the benefits of RBMs are still in constant evolution. So the original RBM metrics that we have been discussing today are considered to be proxy metrics. So they have been measured indirectly and they are not really able to be measured in a direct way. So these proxy metrics are measured for quality, but do not always directly measure the impact attributable to RBM. While half of the member companies have continued using these original metrics, so they have reported that they use, in fact, these original metrics, several member companies are reporting that they are actually defining new or novel key performance indicator, KPIs, to measure the value of RBM. I will talk about these KPIs in a couple of slides that we will see, but just to let you know that the member companies are now turning to defining new KPIs to measure RBM metrics. Best practices appear to include defining measures tailor-made to the chosen RBM model. Again, so each sponsor has its own way of implementing the RBM methodology, and in the same way, its own way of measuring the benefits of RBM. So their individual organizations has an operational specific design tailor-made according to their RBM methodology. And some metrics were found by member companies to be only somewhat useful, while others find the same metrics to be extremely useful, and that's something that we will tackle in the next couple of slides. So next slide, please. What's next for risk-based monitoring metrics? So as from this year and on, RBM is in constant evolution and continues to evolve. And this is due to multiple factors, right? So this includes revisions to the guidelines, to the regulations, to the ICH 6, E8, but also to the fact that the quality management systems are in constant evolution as well. And of course, the technology advances have the potential to impact directly our RBM approaches. So the first point that comes into the horizon, it's the QTLs, the quality tolerance limits, that are called the next frontier for RBM, and are and now the future is to know how to implement them effectively. Our RBM team had published implementation considerations for establishing QTLs, but now TransCelerate has specifically a work stream that it is working on QTLs, on identifying and developing a guidelines to develop and to implement QTLs. Then we have an interest in analyzing the results of RBM specific from the regulatory inspections, because now that we have gained more experience and as we sponsor have more regulatory inspection, we have more knowledge of it. So it is in the interest of TransCelerate to collect information from this. We have collected already some initial data around this topic, but of course the insights remain limited. In addition, the interest in more in-depth insights into RBM's impact on patients and sites is an opportunity for further research. Again, here are the regulations that are in constant evolution, and overall RBM has evolved tremendously over the years. We welcome, of course, the feedback from health authorities and from the industry to share lessons learned, best practices. And lastly, as I mentioned before, there's the technology that has a lot of improvements, and this increases the levels of capability and intelligence to gain some insights on RBM metrics and methodology to measure RBM benefits. And let's go to the next slide, please. So this is more or less what the member companies have reported they've been working on about the novel or new key performance indicator I talked about before. So specifically 9 member companies have responded and they provided some examples on 28 KPIs ranked them by usefulness. I won't go into each of these, but just to give you a flavor or how this looks. As you can see here, the KPIs are ranked from extremely useful to not very useful. and they are categorized in three groups: in process, compliance, or data. This information is raw data. We haven't, summarized or reclassified anything. This is the information as it came from these member companies. So you will find interestingly to see that some of the KPIs could be duplicated into categories, or even for a member company, one specific KPI is extremely useful, while for other is not that useful. For instance, we have on the second column on process, we have the ratio of on-site to off-site monitoring visits reported that extremely useful. But in that same column at the bottom, you can see that other member company reported that on-site versus remote visit ratio is not that, or it's not very useful. So you can see some examples of it. Again, these are the direct answers from the survey respondents, and some of them are qualitative indicators, while others are quantitative indicators. So this is just to give you some flavor of how it looks. And the last slide for my part, it's I wanted to share with you what's next for Sanofi, speaking specifically for the company I work for. What is Sanofi's perspective on the future of RBM metrics? So we are now, we have implemented RBM for 4 years, more or less now. And we have shifted into a continuous improvement mode now. So we are now under the performance metrics redefinition, and we still need to fine-tune these performance metrics, because again, it is not the same to measure things on just a bunch of studies on early adopters or pilot studies than when you go onto a larger or broad scale. We are also working on the fact to the need that we are setting a new target of monitoring visit adaptive approach. We are shifting from one size fit all to fit for purpose. We started our implementation with a fixed monitoring visit approach, and now we are, customize it according to the therapeutic area, to the study design, to the study stage, etc. Also, we are working on the process simplification for metrics calculation methodology, and this should be tackled by each department responsible for each metric. So it is not the same metrics about safety, about SAEs or adverse event that should be tackled by the medical department than, for instance, metrics around query ratio or query resolution that should be tackled by data management department. We are also trying to leverage technology and see into our internal resources to have an automation of performance indicator measurements. We are still performing a lot of manual work to measure these metrics, and it's not consistent. So we are trying to leverage our internal resources to automatize the methodology to measure RBM metrics. We are also implementing QTLs, the quality tolerance limit. So we are participating actively in the TransCelerate QTLs work stream. And now our campaign, as from this year, is to shift from a targeted risk-based monitoring into a more holistic approach of global risk-based quality management, because RBM should be beyond just a monitoring approach. It should be a global risk-based quality management, including all stages from a clinical program, project level, and then clinical trial level to the end. So this is more or less what we are working on Sanofi. And that's it from my part, I guess. So let's now answer a question, a poll question. So what do you think is the most important issue facing RBM implementers today? Please select one. So we have continued technological advancements to support RBM, inspection findings, feedback from marketing applications, more guidance from regulatory authorities, QTLs, or others.
right. Thanks, everyone. It looks like about 50% of the people on the line have voted so far, so we'll leave that open for a few more seconds. All right, and we're up to about 60. It looks like it's leveling off. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and I'll share the results.
Okay, thank you, Gloria. So, interestingly, we see that the majority of you are thinking that the most important issue that you are facing today on the RBM implementation is the continued technological advancements to support RBM. This is no secret for anyone, right? So every day almost we have new technologies that come to us to facilitate our work, but are also constraining our solutions to improve our methodologies. So it is important to be open, to be actively investigating and able to learn from these new technologies to see how this fits or not your organization. And the second, I would say that the second point that were most voted on is the more guidance from regulatory authorities. We know that there are been some revisions to the ICH E6 and E8, but there are more to come for sure. So we need to be also aware of this to be able to implement and to follow the regulatory authorities. So thank you for participating.
Thank you, okay. And we'll go at this time back to Sam.
And sincere apologies for that. I think many are faced with work from home challenging tech issues in the times we're in at the moment. So I just wanted to mention that we have evolved our model, and we took a number of factors into consideration. But generally, when we're looking at how we're wanting to move this forward, internal and external factors will continue to change. The demands of what the business wants from us and what the regulatory guidance is always evolving. As Rodrigo was saying, the sophistication and the technology and the way that we analyze data is evolving at a rapid rate, and we are continually seeing new data sources being introduced to the analyses that we need to do. So we can't afford to be complacent, and we must continue to ensure that even with the need for speed, our data integrity is maintained, because in all of this, the most important thing and why we're all doing this is because patients matter and their safety is of most importance. And the trials that we are conducting will ultimately become treatments for those patients in the future.